The 4-card pattern, unity and duality. Through its long history, the major arcana has attracted a great many interpretations. Today, we tend to look upon the trumps as a psychological process, one that shows us passing through different stages of existence to reach a state of full development. We can describe this state, for the moment, as unity with the world around us, or perhaps liberation from weakness, confusion, and fear. The full arcana describes this process in detail, but to get to an understanding of it as a whole, we need to look at only 4 cards, 4 basic archetypes arranged in a graphic pattern of evolution and spiritual awareness. If you have your own deck of Rider Pack tarot cards, remove the Fool, the Magician, the High Priestess, and the World, and place them in the diamond pattern shown over leaf. Look at them for a while. Notice that while both the Fool and the World show dancing, joyful figures, the Magician and the High Priestess are stationary and unmoving in their positions. If you glance through the rest of the major arcana, you will notice that all the trumps but 0 and 21 are drawn as if staged for a simple photograph, rather than, say, a motion picture. They present themselves as fixed states of existence. But there is a difference between the 2 dancers. The Fool rushes forward richly clothed. The figure in the World is naked. The Fool looks about to leap into the lower world from some high, distant country. The World, paradoxically, appears outside the material universe, the dancer suspended in the magical wreath of victory. Note also the numbers of the 4 cards. 0 is not strictly a number at all. Rather, it represents the absence of any specific number, and therefore we can say that it contains all numbers within itself. It symbolises infinite potentiality. All things remain possible because no definite form has been taken. 1 and 2 are the first genuine numbers, the first reality, again a fixed state. They form the archetypes odd and even, and therefore represent all opposites, male and female, light and dark, passive and active, etc. But 21 combines these 2 numbers in one figure. Look at their postures. The Magician raises a magic wand to the heaven. Besides the idea of spirit and unity, the phallic wand symbolises maleness. The High Priestess sits between 2 pillars, a vaginal symbol as well as a symbol of duality. These 2 pillars appear again and again in the major arcana, in such obvious places as the temple in the Hierophant, and in more subtle ways like the 2 lovers on card 6, or the 2 sphinxes harnessed to the chariot. But now look at the World. The dancer, a female figure, though some decks represent her as a hermaphrodite, carries 2 magic wands, 1 in each hand. The male and female are unified, and more, their separate qualities are subordinated to the higher freedom and joy shone in the light way the dancer holds these powerful symbols. Clearly then, while the horizontal line, the Magician and the High Priestess, shows a duality of opposites, the vertical line, 0 and 21, shows a unity, the Fool being some sort of perfect state before duality, and the World giving us a glimpse of the exhilarating sense of freedom possible if only if we can reconcile the opposites buried in our psyches. The Tarot, like many systems of thought, indeed like many mythologies, symbolises duality as a separation of male and female. The Kabbalists believe that Adam was originally hermaphroditic, and that Eve only became separate from him so that they might regard each other as independent beings. In most cultures, to a greater or lesser degree, men and women see each other as very distinct, almost separate societies. Today, many people think of each person as having both masculine and feminine qualities, but previously such an idea was found only in esoteric doctrines of unification. If we picture duality dramatically as male and female, or black and white, we also experience more subtle splits in our ordinary lives, especially between our hopes, what we imagine as possible, and the reality of what we achieve. Very often the actions we take turn out not to fulfill our hopes for them. The marriage gives less than the total happiness expected, the job or career brings more frustration than fulfillment. Many artists have said that the paintings on the canvases are never the paintings they envisioned. They never can express what they really wanted to say. Somehow the reality of life is always less than the potential. Acutely aware of this, many people agonize over every decision, no matter how small or great, because they cannot accept that once they take an action in one direction, they have lost the chance to go in all other directions previously open to them. They cannot accept the limitations of acting in the real world. The split between potentiality and reality is sometimes seen as the separation between mind and body. We sense that our thoughts and emotions are something distinct from our physical presence in the world. The split between potentiality and reality is sometimes seen as separation between mind and body. We sense that our thoughts and emotions are something distinct from our physical presence in the world. The mind is unlimited, able to go anywhere in the universe, backwards or forwards in time. The body is weak, subject to hunger, tiredness, sickness. Attempting to resolve this separation, people have gone to philosophical extremes. Behaviorists have claimed that mind does not exist, only the body and the habits it develops are real. At the other end, many mystics have experienced the body as an illusion created by our limited understanding. Christian tradition defines the soul as the immortal true self, existing before and after the body that contains it. And many religions and sects, such as the Gnostics and some Kabbalists, have considered the body a prison created by the sins or mistakes of our fallen ancestors. At the source of all these dualities, we feel we do not know ourselves. We sense that deep down our true nature is something stronger, freer, with great wisdom and power, or else a thing of violent passions and furious animal desires. Either way, we know that this true self hides, or perhaps lies buried deep inside our normal, socially restricted personalities. But how do we reach it? Assuming the essential self is to be a thing of beauty and power, how do we liberate it? The disciplines we call the occult sciences begin with a strong awareness of all these splits and limitations. They then go on, however, to another idea, that there exists a key, or a plan, to bring everything together, to unify our lives with our hopes as we release our latent strength and wisdom. People often confuse the purposes of spiritual disciplines. Many think the tarot is for fortune-telling, that alchemists want to become rich by changing lead to gold, that Kabbalists work spells by saying secret words, and so on. In reality, these disciplines aim at a psychological unification. The base metal that the alchemist wishes to change to gold is himself. Accepting the doctrine that we have fallen from a perfect state to a limited one, the occultist does not believe we must simply wait passively for some future redemption by an outside agent. On the contrary, he or she believes it our responsibility to bring about that redemption by finding the key to unity. The tarot depicts a version of that key. It is not the key, just as it is not really a secret doctrine. It represents a process. And one of the things it teaches us is that we make a mistake when we assume that unification comes through any simple key or formula. Rather, it comes through growth and increased awareness as we travel step by step through the 21 stages of the major arcana. The Fool represents true innocence, a kind of perfect state of joy and freedom, a feeling of being one with the spirit of life at all times. In other words, the immortal self we feel became entrapped in the confusions and compromises of the ordinary world. Perhaps such a radiant self never really existed. Somehow we experience our intuition of it as something lost. Virtually every culture has developed a myth of a fall from a primeval paradise. Innocence is a word often misunderstood. It does not mean without guilt, but rather a freedom and a total openness to life, a complete lack of fear that comes through a total faith in living in your own instinctive self. Innocence does not mean asexual, as some people think. It is sexuality expressed without fear, without guilt, without connivance and dishonesty. It is sexuality expressed spontaneously and freely, as the expression of love and the ecstasy of life. The Fool bears the number 0 because all things are possible to the person who is always ready to go in any direction. He does not belong in any specific place. He is not fixed like the other cards. His innocence makes him a person with no past, and therefore an infinite future. Every moment is a new starting point. In Arabic numerals, the number 0 bears the shape of an egg, to indicate that all things emerge from it. Originally the 0 was written as a dot. In Hermetic and Kabbalistic traditions, the universe emerged from a single point of light. And God in the Kabbalah is often described as nothingness, because to describe God as anything would be to limit him to some finite fixed state. Those tarot commentators who argue whether the Fool belongs before, after, or somewhere between the other cards seem to be missing the point. The Fool is movement, change, the constant leap through life. For the Fool, no difference exists between possibility and reality. 0 means a total emptiness of hopes and fears, and the Fool expects nothing, plans nothing. He responds instantly to the immediate situation. Other people will receive his complete spontaneity, nothing calculated, nothing held back. He does not do this deliberately, like someone consciously deciding to be wholly honest with a friend or a lover. The fool gives his honesty and love naturally to everyone without ever thinking about it. We speak of the fool as he and the world dancer as she because of their appearance in the pictures, but both can be a woman or a man with really no change. Just as the fool does not experience a separateness from the physical world, so he or she does not experience any isolation from the opposite sex. The fool and the dancer are psychic hermaphrodites, expressing their complete humanity at all times by their very natures. Now look again at the 4-card pattern. See how the fool splits into the magician and the high priestess, who must be brought back together again to form the world. The 2 cards represent the splitting up of the fool's innocence into the illusion of opposites. The world shows us a restored unity, but a higher and deeper unity achieved through the growth outlined in the other 18 cards. The fool is innocence, but the world is wisdom. The fool teaches us that life is simply a continuous dance of experience, but most of us cannot maintain even brief moments of such spontaneity and freedom, due to fears, conditioning, and simply the very real problems of daily life. We necessarily allow our egos to isolate us from experience. Yet within us we can sense, dimly, the possibility of freedom, and therefore we call this vague feeling of a loss a fall from innocence. Once we lose that innocence, however, we cannot simply climb back up to the level of the fool. Instead, we must struggle and learn through maturity, self-discovery, and spiritual awareness until we reach the greater freedom of the world. The magician represents action, the high priestess passivity, the magician maleness, the high priestess femaleness, the magician consciousness, the high priestess unconsciousness. By consciousness, we do not mean the high awareness of the world, but rather the powerful yet limited consciousness of the ego as it creates our outer universe of boundaries and forms. This description does not mean to denigrate or belittle the magician's creative force. What greater creativity is there than giving shape to the chaos of experience? It is the magician who gives life its meaning and purpose. Healers, artists, and occultists have all focused on the magician as their patron card. Nevertheless, his power represents an isolation from the freedom of the fool or the understanding of the world. In the same way, the high priestess indicates, in her unconsciousness, a very deep state of intuitive awareness, and yet her inner knowledge does not belong to that radiant centre of nothingness that enables the fool to act so freely. The high priestess represents the archetype of inner truth, but because this truth is unconscious, inexpressible, she can maintain it only through total passivity. This situation shows itself in life in numerous ways. We all carry between us a dim sense of who we are, of a genuine self never seen by other people and impossible to explain. But the women and men who throw themselves into competition, careers, responsibilities, without working at the same time to increase self-knowledge, often discover at some point that they have lost a sense of who they are, of what they once wanted in life. Now, directly opposite to these people, the Buddhist monk or nun withdraws from the world because the slightest involvement will distract them from the centre of their meditations. Both the magician and the high priestess bear an archetypal purity. In a way, they have not lost the fool's radiance. They have simply split it up into light and darkness. In the traditional split of Western and Eastern religion, the magician represents the West, with its emphasis on action and historical salvation. The high priestess the East, the way of separation from the world and time. Yet those who've gone deepest into both traditions will combine these elements. The high priestess sits between the pillars of light and dark. Though she herself symbolises the dark passive side, her intuition can find a balance between the two. This is less paradoxical than it sounds. If we sense our lives as filled with opposites which we cannot resolve, we can react in either of two ways. We can rush back and forth, going from one extreme to the other, or we can do absolutely nothing, sit in the middle, not seduced in either direction, but passive, allowing the opposites to go around you. Except, of course, that this too is a choice, and eventually we lose that balance and that inner knowledge simply because life continues on around us. In Kabbalist imagery, the high priestess represents the pillar of harmony, a force which reconciles the opposing pillars of mercy and judgment. Therefore she sits between the two pillars on the temple. But without the ability to blend in the active force of the magician, the high priestess's sense of harmony becomes swept away. As archetypes, the magician and the high priestess cannot exist in our lives any more than the fool can. Inevitably, we mix up these elements rather than blend them, and therefore experience their lesser forms as confused action, or else insecure and guilt-ridden passivity. In other words, the purity of the two poles becomes lost because life muddles them together. The purpose of the major arcana is twofold. First of all, by isolating the elements of our lives into archetypes, it enables us to see them in their pure forms, as aspects of psychological truth. Secondly, it helps us to truly resolve these different elements, to take us step by step through the different stages of life until it brings us to unity. In reality, perhaps the innocence symbolized by the fool never existed. Somehow we experience as something lost. The major arcana tells us how to get it back.